about the information that they can put out that is relevant at the time.
Thank you. And certainly you'll have seen the report that we published as a committee about the policing of the disorder following Southport, and that we were very concerned that there hadn't been as much transparency. So, but one of the things we were also concerned about was the CPS protocol, which seemed to us to be not reflective of the current situation with social media. I wonder if you have any information on that. Has there been any update to it?
So the Law Commission are undertaking a review on contempt of court, on how information can be provided in anticipation of a trial. We obviously have a long-standing the tradition of trial by jury in this country, and as a result that has impacts on what can be said to ensure that there is a fair trial and that we don't end up with trial by jury being jeopardised as a result of partial information, misinformation, incomplete information, or people hearing part of the story and not getting the full evidence in court. Obviously, the full evidence should be put before the court as well, and as much transparency too. But I think all of us have to recognise that, as you put in your report, the social media and the pace at which information circulates on social media means the kinds of the framework that we had all understood to be in place when we were only dealing with traditional media, all of that has changed now, and so police forces in particular do need to be able to respond to that fast pace of both information and misinformation in order to make sure actually that can be part of protecting trial by jury and protecting a fair trial as well. So we have urged the Law Commission to speed up this particular bit of their consideration and look forward to their reflections on the detail of this. But I think the committee is right to raise this as a very significant issue.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to neighbourhood policing, and Margaret Mullane.
Thank you. Home Secretary, you've forecast and mentioned in a previous meeting with us the increases in neighbourhood policing teams, which we all welcome. But I'm going to highlight the Metropolitan Police have indicated that their financial settlement will mean, in their terms, cuts really, officer and staff cuts. I just wonder, what forecast have you made on how this is going to work? How will it happen?
Yeah. So I think the first steps that we've set out on neighbourhood policing is perhaps one of the most important issues, one of the important things that we have done since I was last before the committee, because we've had over many years really the decline in neighbourhood policing, if not the decimation of neighbourhood policing, many areas seeing their neighbourhood policing effectively just cut in half. And that really matters because it's that connection with local communities that builds confidence, that also helps prevent crime, tackle local problems, and also get the intelligence that goes after criminals, perpetrators, and can make sure that you can get swift justice as well. So we are determined we need to restore neighbourhood policing across the country. As part of the first year, we've increased the funding for police forces by over £1 billion, up to over £1 billion for this year, including 200 million specifically dedicated for neighbourhood policing across the country. As a result of that, there are 3,000 additional neighbourhood police officers pledged for this current financial year, 2,500 of which are police officers, another I think around 400 of which are PCSOs as well. And just as a quick brief tangent, if you'll allow me, it means in my constituency we have now got 7-day neighbourhood policing shifts for the first time for a very long time. We've had the on-off shift patterns that frankly local criminals have been able to exploit. So that's the kind of difference that it makes. In terms of the Met's position, the Met does have some particular structural problems in its finances and some historic legacy issues around its finance. So we are working with the Met Police and with the Mayor's office around that. But even notwithstanding some of those historic challenges, they are still increasing their neighbourhood policing by 470 additional police on the streets of London in the course of this year. So even notwithstanding their financial challenges that we're working through with them, they're still putting additional neighbourhood police on the streets.
Okay, and if I could just follow up, so that is good news, but how do you think you'll ensure that the neighbourhood policing guarantee doesn't lead to the performance management, the problems with that as well, and obviously the problems with abstractions as well?
So we're setting up a system. We've been working very closely with policing on this, with the National Police Chiefs Council on how we roll out neighbourhood policing, including making sure we have regular monitoring, including month-by-month monitoring to ensure that neighbourhood policing is being rolled out, to ensure that the financing within the 200 million only follows once the neighbourhood police are in place. And we are also working with policing in order to be able to have proper systems in place to monitor and prevent that kind of abstraction. Because you're right, you'd often go talk to neighbourhood police teams and they'd say, oh, well, half of our team is actually being abstracted for something else. That's not the way we need to do neighbourhood policing. We need them dedicated in teams. There will always be emergencies, situations, events that happen, including, for example, the kind of event that happened in Liverpool last week, where, of course, neighbourhood police will be moved to where they need to be, but we still need them to be spending the majority of their time in the local communities.
Thank you.
Maguire with a quick supplementary.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick follow-up to that, if I may, Home Secretary. So one huge concern that constituents of mine coming from rural area of North Cornwall is that this neighbourhood policing guarantee framework won't actually take account of rural areas. So obviously per head population is important and policing resources are put there. But in constituencies like mine, we have county line drug gangs, lots of rural thefts. How will you and your department take account of the rural areas to make sure that they benefit from this as well?
Yeah. First of all, neighbourhood policing matters in rural areas as much as it matters in urban areas. And it's crucial that obviously they'll operate in different ways, different patterns of working in rural areas, but that needs to be responsive to the kinds of communities. Secondly, we are working with the National Police Chiefs Council on a rural crime strategy in order to be able to recognise the kinds of the different patterns of crime. Sometimes we've seen serious and organised crime exploit issues in rural areas, for example. Devon and Cornwall are seeing a significant number of neighbourhood police increasing. I should have had the table in front of me and then I could have told you the precise numbers for this year. But it needs to be making sure every area has neighbourhood policing. I will say we obviously have asked the police to prioritise town centre patrols as part of this first year, because I think that town centre crime, where we've had increased shoplifting and street theft, has been a particular issue that needs to be a priority, but it needs to apply to all areas.
Can I recommend you speak to Staffordshire Police, who've been doing excellent work on this for a number of years, so I want to give them credit. But Sean Davis.
And before we move off that particular subject, I also encourage you to look at West Mercia Police, who are looking to prevent CSOs from being on duty after 8 p.m. And they are consulting on that. And Home Secretary, I understand you'll respect the independence of the police, but clearly that goes against the grain of the guarantee that we are talking about, doesn't it?
So the point about having neighbourhood policing is to respond to the kinds of challenges within each individual community. So that might be about, depending on some areas, that might be about daytime shoplifting in particular town centres, or it might be about the nighttime economy. It might be particular areas where there are evening challenges. And it is important that the police forces respond to exactly what those kinds of challenges are. On Staffordshire Police, for example, I actually know they are doing some very good work around off-road bikes, including using drones to go after off-road bikes. We obviously, as part of the Crime and Policing Bill, are introducing stronger powers for them also to be able to seize the bikes much more swiftly.
Okay, Home Secretary, just moving on then. Do you share the concerns raised by the Met, the NCA and MI5 about the risk to public safety of releasing offenders earlier in their prison sentence?
Well, clearly, we need to ensure that the prisons crisis is dealt with, and also that we are doing everything possible to make sure that criminals face justice and face penalties for their crimes, and also that public safety is maintained. We did inherit the most appalling prison crisis, where the previous government had, even in 14 years, had built only a few hundred prison places compared to the many more that we have delivered even just since the election, and the 14,000 prison places that the Lord Chancellor has committed to. But even notwithstanding that, we cannot reach a situation where if the police arrest a dangerous offender, they cannot be in the situation where there is no place to put them. There is nowhere to be able to put someone on remand or while they're being arrested as well. So that's why we've commissioned the sentencing review. That's why the Lord Chancellor has taken forward an initial response to the sentencing review and will be bringing forward legislation. As part of that, the government has rejected one of David Gauke's recommendations around some of the most serious offenders and are exempting the most serious offenders from, and that includes terrorism offenders, from some of the early release arrangements. And we are also strengthening the work in terms of the curfews, tagging, the much stronger penalties in the community and stronger monitoring as well. We will continue. I know that the Lord Chancellor has already been working closely with the police and others, and some of the stronger safeguards, particularly around terrorism offenders, were announced after that letter had been drawn up.
By definition, if those prisoners are not in prison and they are in the community, they'll require more resources in the community to manage those offenders. Has that formed part of your submissions to the Treasury as part of the spending review? And if so, would you like to say anything more about that and how that links to these very important national organisations raising the concerns that they are?
So first of all, just obviously on the terrorism offenders, they are obviously those most serious offenders are being exempted. Clearly, there needs to be the proper action in communities in order to make sure that cases are monitored. It's why the Lord Chancellor has already announced the increase in probation. I think much as probably many members might want to tempt me to comment on the spending review in advance of it being announced next week, I will refrain from doing so, but clearly we will always want more investment around policing and around meeting the challenges that they face, and that includes challenges from the sentencing review, challenges from different patterns of changing crime as well.
Thank you. And just before we move off the spending review, clearly also important that the ambitions that the government was elected on in July are also funded as well. Are these things being taken into the round as part of those submissions? Clearly, I don't want to sort of ask you to break any confidences around that process, but clearly very important to communities and constituents like mine.
Clearly those will be central focus, not just of the Home Office, but right across the government. We set out a plan for change, and it's really important that that plan for change is delivered as the government set out, and also that we make sure that we're ensuring the centrality of security underpinning so much of what we do. It's the approach that we take in the Home Office, but I think it's an approach really right across the government, which is if you don't feel secure and safe, you can't enjoy the opportunities in your life. If a country doesn't feel safe and strong, then we won't get the kind of growth that we need as well. So whilst growth is the first priority for the government, security and public safety are the first duties of any government, and that is certainly the case for a Labour government too.
Thank you. If I can move to police reform. Sir Mark Rowley has stated that the police are up for radical reform, and Gavin Stevenson's call for bigger and capable forces. What's your view, Home Secretary, in terms of police reform? Do you see a case for fewer chief constables, fewer police forces across England and Wales?
So we're working with the police in a way that I think has not been done by the Home Office before, certainly not for a very long time, in drawing up proposals for the police reform white paper. And it is looking at a series of issues of how we modernise, reform and overhaul policing. That does include looking at what should rightly be done at national level, at regional level, at force level, and at local level, at local neighbourhood level as well as part of that. So we will set out our conclusions when we set out the police reform white paper it does mean recognising that there are some things that shouldn't be done in the current chaotic way across 43 different police forces, even if that's the issues around some of the national the services that underpinning enabling services, such as forensics, such as helicopters, the NPAS service, and that some of those need to be driven by effectively a new national policing body. And so that will be part of the reforms. We'll set out in due course what that means in terms of what should then be done at regional and local level.
Well, what you're sort of setting out there is capabilities being centralised, and I think that there's probably a strong case for that. But do you see a case for less chief constables, less police forces, and mandating reform from the centre in the case, for example, what the Deputy Prime Minister is doing around local government, for example?
We are aligning the approach that we're taking with some of the work around local government. So, for example, where there are mayors been introduced, we've talked about the policing powers coming under part of the responsibilities of mayors and deputy mayors as well. So, but I think I understand the question that you're raising, but some of these are issues that we will set out when we set out the overall response as part of the police reform white paper.
Just one final question in regards to this, and just in terms of the capability and capacity of the Home Office to oversee that reform programme and also holding the police accountable, notwithstanding their operational independence for some of the pledges you're making, does the Home Office have that capacity and that capability in the centre to do that?
We are strengthening that capacity. I think that the Home Office did not have that capacity. I think the Home Office had been hollowed out on policing over very many years, going back probably till about 2013. As part of the reforms that were introduced, I think the Home Office then was hollowed out on policing and lost actually a lot of the sense of oversight of data, being able to properly monitor, have a performance management approach to policing. So we are re-establishing that. We are rebuilding the performance management framework, including a performance monitoring unit in the Home Office. But we're not doing this as let's just strengthen the Home Office separately from policing. We're doing this as a partnership, and the way in which policing and the Home Office need to work together in order to raise standards, in order to make sure there's real proper drivers for reform.
Thank you.
Jack Richards.
Thank you, Home Secretary. I declare an interest, as I did previously, that a member of my family works for the Home Secretary. I want to ask about facial recognition technology. I asked when you last came to the committee about that. The evidence, even since then, from think tanks and from abroad, has been that this can have transformative effect for police forces, both in day-to-day, tackling day-to-day antisocial behaviour, but also some of the most serious offences, including rape and murder. From the outside, it seems that there's been little progress from the government in this regard in building a legal framework which will allow police forces to take advantage of this. I just wondered whether you could update the committee.
So, as you know, most police forces now will use retrospective facial recognition, but there's also huge potential in terms of some of the live facial recognition as well. It does require, police forces strongly think that it requires a clear legal framework within which they can operate. The policing minister has been holding a series of meetings both with police forces and more broadly about what that framework should look like. We do want to bring forward a new framework so that it's clear that more forces can use facial recognition and can be able to use it in the most effective way.
Is there any sense of time frame for that?
I can write to you on the policing minister's assessment of what the next steps in the timetable will be.
Around.
Thank you, and thank you, Home Secretary. Clearly, when it comes to police reform, the reality of modern policing needs to be the driving force behind that. And so I wanted to turn to protest policing. Currently, only London and the City of London police receive specific funding for protest, while areas like Greater Manchester, which certainly are regional centres for protest at the very least, if not national centres, receive nothing and have to meet costs through existing budgets. This leaves the Greater Manchester City region about 2.6 million worse off because of protest. And it seems unfair that council taxpayers in my constituency and across Greater Manchester see their precept diluted by protest in that way, whilst council taxpayers in London don't. So would you consider, as part of police reform, a demand-led approach to protest policing so that areas like Greater Manchester are not disadvantaged and having to use stretched existing budgets?
So I think, of course, there will always be concerns from police forces all over the country that there are particular pressures that individual police forces face, and those can vary. So sometimes that can be around particular patterns of protest, sometimes it can be around other kinds of forms of crime or other incidents as well. Obviously, the issue that the capital also faces is some of the big national events, from the King's coronation to obviously some of those sort of international events and things as well. There will also be international events that can be held in different parts of the country, which also put pressures on as well. So in the end, we have to keep a balance on all of that. We do need police forces to be able to manage the kinds of pressures that they face within their budgets. And we also need to keep that balance around the country. So that's why there is currently an additional capital city grant for London that isn't replicated in other parts of the country. Obviously, as part of the police reform white paper, we will continue to look at issues of funding all around the country and the way in which funding takes place. But those funding issues are never easy because everybody's always got a particular reason why they want to change the funding formula and the approach.
Of course, but considering particularly the recent significant increase we've had in protests and protest policing, do you think that should form an important consideration going forward? And do you think the balance as it stands is currently fair, where London is ring-fenced and other major cities, with Manchester, I feel obliged to point out, hosting many international events alongside seeing extremely high levels of protest, especially in recent months?
So I do understand that, and I know that many forces will continue to make representations about different issues. We will always look at representations that are made to us, but all I would say is there is never a perfect way to ensure that funding takes place for police forces, and there will always be individual police forces, probably several around the table from different forces that are here, represented here. They will always want to raise the particular challenges and pressures that they face.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Home Secretary. If we could just move to counter extremism, please. What were the findings of the end-to-end review of prevent thresholds, and did it look at drivers and trends in the growth of extremism, particularly among young boys and men?
So, can I say this is one of the issues that I am really worried about. And we are seeing increasing extremism among young people. We are seeing increasing numbers in I think the CT caseload trebling in the space of 3 years involving teenagers. I see it in the kinds of cases that I'm briefed on as well. Just increasing numbers of teenagers, even as young as 13, where there are serious concerns, maybe about Islamist extremism, maybe about far-right extremism, maybe about sort of violent fixated individuals where there is a mixed and unclear ideology, but growing numbers of young people. And I was obviously a cabinet minister in the last Labour government, and we were looking back at just the patterns and the numbers over time. And in the last 3 years of the last Labour government, 14 young people were arrested for terrorism-related activity. In the last 3 years, 114 were arrested. And what we've also seen, I think, is a doubling of the number of young people being referred to prevent since last summer as well. So I think this does raise some very significant challenges for us. It's one of the reasons that we have introduced we're introducing the youth diversion order as part of the crime and policing bill, but it's also one of the reasons that we are setting changes to prevent and some reforms to prevent, looking again at the thresholds for prevent, but also asking David Anderson to review the overall operations as the interim prevent commissioner, so setting up this interim prevent commissioner for the first time. And that is one of the things that has come out of the review that we did after the election, the work that we did around countering extremism, was the way in which prevent needs to reform. Yes, to look at thresholds. I continued to be concerned about the threshold ending up being too high and not enough Islamist extremist cases being referred to prevent, and the need to do more to make sure more of those cases were being referred to prevent, but also in the way in which prevent could respond and the ability of prevent to work with other local services as well. I know this is an issue that the committee is looking into, and we very much welcome the committee's reflections on some of these issues around young people.
There's obviously a broad degree of consensus. I mean, from the National Crime Agency's National Strategic Assessment, from the Director General of MI5, from lots of different figures about the role that online radicalisation is playing in this process. And I think that's a concern reflected by parents and many people right across the country. Many people come and speak to me, and I'm sure other members of the committee as well. So from your perspective, from a national security perspective and a violence and terrorism perspective, what view do you have on the need to limit access to that material online, access in terms of social media channels, and the government's agenda and approach in that area?
Yeah, well, some of this is terrorism-related material, and it is unlawful and should not be online. Some of this is about sort of radicalising processes that are taking place online, where the material may not be unlawful, but the approach to young people is exploitative and is dangerous. The first step is obviously the Ofcom have introduced their now new code of practice and their new standards, the new standards now that need to be adopted as part of the Online Safety Act that social media companies now need to adopt, particularly around under 18s, including restrictions around and safety requirements on under 18s. We want Ofcom to be extremely robust in enforcing those standards, and I think it's really important that they do. But we're also working, and work underway with the National Crime Agency as well, which does some of the investigations around some of the criminal networks that are operating online, because there is sometimes overlaps between, we've seen some of the extremist radicalisation networks, but also some of the criminal exploitation networks. And you might have seen the National Crime Agency talk about the con networks as well, which were pursuing the most horrendous child abuse and child sexual exploitation online as well. So what we're building and developing is stronger work across the different agencies to address this, and we will have more work that we are doing at the moment. I suppose what I'm flagging to you is this is an area I am particularly personally really concerned about, and think that the government and organisations across society are going to need to do much more.
And if I might just finally to move to the international, I've been approached by many concerned Jewish residents and community groups in particular regarding the recent arrest of the 3 Iranian nationals and the support they were giving to the regime in Iran, considering its pernicious role in the Middle East. Given the legal challenges identified by Jonathan Hall in applying the Terrorism Act to state-backed threats, when does the government intend to bring forward legislation to create a new power of prescription to cover such threats?
We do need to bring forward new legislation. Jonathan Hall identified challenges with the existing legislation. The existing legislation is drawn around terrorism, and the state threats can often look like terrorism in the impact that they have in communities, the impact that they have on public safety, but the nature of the organisation behind them, the purpose and the way in which they operate means that Jonathan Hall has made clear the existing terrorism legislation, it is too difficult to use to be able to use prescribing powers in the same way. However, I am clear we need a prescribing power for state-backed organisations that pose a threat to our country, and it's incredibly important that we defend our national security and have those powers in place. So we are doing the follow-up work now based on Jonathan Hall's report, based on what those legal provisions will look like. We will bring them in obviously at the earliest opportunity. You'll know there's obviously a limit I can do to preempt parliamentary timetable discussions, but we are clear that this change needs to take place, and whether that is about Iran or Russia or other organisations or other countries that have posed state-backed threats to our country, we need to make sure we've got the powers to keep people safe.
Good, thank you.
Can I just ask, what is going to be the difference between the new independent Prevent Commissioner and the Counter-Extremism Commissioner?
Independent Prevent Commissioner probably is more similar to the Independent Reviewer of Counter-Terrorism in its form, and it is effectively an oversight process and mechanism to be able to look at the effectiveness of the Prevent programme. As we know, the Prevent has huge numbers of referrals each year and takes action on them, but there's never been a proper oversight or some independent person to be able to look at the decisions that they're making, the impact that that's having, and to be able to raise concerns or problems or look changes in patterns of the kinds of cases being referred to them, or changes in the way in which the Prevent programme needs to respond, or simply to say, actually, there's been some problems and some serious problems in individual cases. So we need the independent Prevent Reviewer to be able to do that in the same way that we have a counter-terrorism legislation reviewer who can play that independent role. I think the counter-extremism role as a different one, includes working with a whole series of different agencies across society on charities, on different standards around local authorities and so on. So I think those are different
One's
approaches.
More reviewer and the other is more wide-ranging.
I think, one of the counter-extremism is probably a more wide-ranging, focused outwards across the country. The independent Prevent Reviewer is about this particular programme that is crucially important to our public safety and making sure that it is there is proper oversight of it to make sure that it meets the highest standards.
Thank you. And as you said, we are looking in this. We've got the new inquiry on new forms of radicalisation, so we will be looking at this. Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to focus my questioning on child sexual exploitation and gang-related grooming. Home Secretary, last month I met with your colleague, the Safeguarding Minister, alongside a leading child abuse lawyer, David Greenwood, who has acted on behalf of many of those victims and survivors of the Rotherham cases. And we presented a dossier to your department which outlined that they're concluding that there is potentially tens of thousands of children across Keighley and the Bradford district that have been exploited going back to the 1990s. And I hope that this has made it to your desk. And despite growing calls for a local inquiry, the dossier also listed the documented refusals that we've had at a local authority level and indeed across the mayoralty as to the fact that we should not have a local inquiry, which is deeply concerning to me. So the questions I've got is, are you worried about the situation in the Bradford district? And does it not set off alarm bells to you that local leaders in Bradford were rejecting the prospect of a local inquiry within hours of your statement that you gave to the floor of the House in January, well before they would have had time to read the contents of your announcement, indeed analyse it properly?
Yes, I know that the Safeguarding Minister has met with you, and thank you for the information and evidence that you've provided. I mean, this is a truly vile crime, and I think it has really disturbing lifelong consequences for the children, the teenagers, the very often teenage girls who have been raped, abused, and just subjected to the most horrendous of crimes. And so thank you for raising those cases. And the Safeguarding Minister has also met with some victims from Bradford, as well as from other parts of the country as part of the response. Just to, I suppose, update you in terms of where we are on this. We obviously asked Baroness Casey to do the audit of the nature and scale and patterns of child sexual exploitation and abuse, the different gang abuse right across the country. She has asked for a short extension. I've obviously written to the committee based on that. We, I think, do need her audit to inform the sort of next steps and decisions around the local inquiries. We are clear that we've said from the start we would support at least 5 local inquiries. With Oldham, we are working underway already, but we are waiting for Baroness Casey's report back. So I do recognise, and the Safeguarding Minister has recognised, the particular case that you've raised around Bradford. We are waiting for Baroness Casey's report before we can take the next steps on that.
I completely acknowledge that, and thank you for that response, Home Secretary. And I will look at that report when it gets released. But the reality of it is that report is not looking specifically at local authorities. It's more focusing on police forces. So the point that I want to put to you is, at Bradford Council, we were given the reasoning by our leader that a report would be too expensive for a local authority to pursue. And my understanding is, based on the announcement you gave back in January, that there will be about a £5 million allocation for 5 local audits, local inquiries to take place. So if Bradford was to be one of those and that money was allocated, would you expect the leadership at Bradford to get behind that?
Well, we have identified funding to ensure that we can make sure there is additional funding for local inquiries. Clearly that is important. Once the Casey review and the Casey audit has reported back to us, we will set out those next steps, both about how we will then expect local inquiries to be taken forward and also the funding support that we will give. Obviously, we want all local organisations and agencies, including councils, including other local organisations, to support local inquiries. I think that has been immensely important. We are looking at the overarching thing, because there is clearly an issue about policing. There is also an issue about local authority responsibilities, because very often victims were in care or were in areas where other social services had engagement with victims, and so there are responsibilities there. On the policing side, as you'll know, I have also always said the most important thing is to get perpetrators behind bars and to make sure that they face justice for these horrendous crimes. And I can update the committee on that, because I did ask all police forces to review historic cases. Half of all forces have reported back to the Home Office, and the idea is we've asked them to review cases that were closed where no further action was taken, and where there are cases to then work with the task force, the Police Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force, which is the national task force which has considerable expertise, to then review those cases and to look to reopen and pursue any new lines of inquiry that have not been properly pursued. For around half of all forces have reported back to the Home Office. Now we are waiting for the reports back from the other half of police forces. For those forces, 287 historic cases have been identified for review by the Police Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force, and I will keep the committee updated with progress on that.
And may I just expand on bringing it back to local authorities? And this is, don't forget, this is a local authority where has had children's services taken away from it under the previous administration with a new trust structure set up. So there's deep levels of concern about what's going on in Bradford. One of the reasons was, as I've already said, was it will cost a huge amount of money. The second reasoning was the leader of Bradford Council argued that the inquiry, if we had one in Bradford, would simply be paying somebody to write another report and that there would be no new learning. So can I just put the point to you, do you agree with Bradford Council's local leadership in thinking that these local inquiries will provide absolutely no new information or learning?
So what we found from the experience of the Telford inquiry, and also actually the if you go back into the initial Rotherham inquiries that took place, the two different Rotherham reviews that took place even back 10 years ago, one by Alexis Jay and one by Baroness Louise Casey, is that in different forms, and those were actually, there were three different kinds of reviews that took place: the Alexis Jay one, the Louise Casey one, which was under Local Government Act powers, and then the Telford inquiry, which was set out locally. In each of those cases, they uncovered important new local information, but also they provided a basis for action to be taken. And in particular, action to be taken both to go after perpetrators and to ensure that new standards are in place. So, as I've said, we will take forward the next steps around those local inquiries is when we have the audit back from Baroness Casey, but we are clear that local authorities can play a very, local inquiries can play a very important part and role in this process.
Which is excellent to hear. The point that I'm trying to make here is local authorities are coming up with excuses. I'm absolutely seeing that within my own area of Keighley and the wider Bradford district as to why not to have one. Will it be the case where we have local authorities that refuse to put themselves forward to be having an inquiry, that you, as using your powers as the Home Secretary, will step in? Because why on earth are we allowing it to be a voluntary approach at the moment, which is effectively allowing local authorities to mark their own homework? So will it be the case, if Bradford Council continue to refuse to have one, that you as the Home Secretary, when we have presented a dossier to you and made such a huge amount of levels of concern, that you would step forward and make Bradford Council get behind your calls for a local inquiry to take place?
The first thing I would say is these have to be independent inquiries. So these can't be inquiries that are done by local authorities. They have to be independent inquiries, and it's only independent inquiries that we will provide funding for. That's what happened with the Telford inquiry. Although it was initiated by the local authority and local organisations, it was then conducted independently. That is crucial. This is, I do understand the questions you're raising, but some of these are the points we will respond to once we get Baroness Casey's audit, because part of what she's looking at is what are the key areas, what are the key issues that are raised in terms of what we know at the moment, and we need to ensure that the framework for those local inquiries and also other reforms that we will need to introduce evidence and reflects that information. This needs to look at issues around both being able to get to the truth in terms of the police investigations, but also making sure there are proper accountability mechanisms in place. So we're alive to all of those points. We raised some of those points actually at the very beginning of this process when we identified some of the principles that we needed to reflect. We obviously, I think when we had agreed this, the timings for this, we might have had responses earlier, but we are waiting for Baroness Casey's audit, and I hope other people will understand that's important.
Thank you.
I'm going to move us on. I know that Robbie will keep coming back on this, but Jake Richards.
A question on this, Home Secretary, briefly. I've met with victims of abuse and child rape in my constituency and South Yorkshire, and one aspect of this horrific scandal is the fact that some children who were victims of crimes have now got criminal records. I wrote to you just last month seeking for the government to look at ways in which those criminal records could be expunged and justice could be done in that small regard but important regard. I just wonder if there was any update that you could offer the committee.
We have to take action on this. The law has changed, but there are still people who have been convicted of crimes where they were being exploited. They were the victim of the most horrendous exploitation, and they were children. And although the law has changed now around the sort of prostitution laws, the idea of treating somebody who was a child as a prostitute when they were being exploited, when they were the victim of the most horrendous exploitation, including sexual exploitation and rape, I just think is wrong. So the law has changed. We now need to look at the action we need to take to make sure that those historic cases are addressed and people don't carry around that criminal record with them for the rest of their lives for outdated laws and for things that happened in their childhood when they were being exploited.
I am going to have to suspend because we have a vote. So we will suspend for 10 minutes. We'll be back at 3:55. Order. So we will resume following the vote and turn to Jake Richards to ask about digital ID.
Thank you. Home Secretary, yesterday at Home Office Questions, Edward Lee, the Father of the House, said that there was now cross-party consensus across British politics as to the need for a more universal digital ID system. Obviously, the government are making huge strides in this agenda anyway. The e-visa programme, we have digital driving licences that Peter Carl, the Secretary of State, is leading on, one login, various initiatives. Is there any scope in your mind for a more ambitious cross-departmental programme to utilise digital ID?
So, as you rightly say, the DCIT department is already developing digital ID. What we are particularly looking at is how we have digital ID for everyone coming to the UK. Through whatever visa, through whatever system that they arrive in the UK, that we have digital ID in those circumstances. We've set this out in the white paper in terms of what our next steps are on this. So we want, for example, to have a digital service linked to e-visas and linked to our border management process to be able to determine whether an individual is in or out of the UK, whether they have left at the point at which their visa expires, or whether they are overstaying and immigration enforcement action is needed. We also want to ensure the e-visas can effectively be used as a way of having that digital ID around the ability to work, to be here lawfully and to have the ability to work. So one of the things we are doing is now strengthening the enforcement capabilities for our immigration enforcement teams. We've increased the illegal working raids by 40% since the election. And increased arrests for illegal working by around 40% since the election, because we made clear it's a sort of core principle that the rules need to be respected and enforced as part of the immigration and asylum systems. And I think for too long they haven't been. So we need to strengthen that enforcement. But as part of that, if the immigration enforcement teams increasingly have biometric kits, then that allows them to do the on-the-spot checks, whether somebody does have a valid e-visa, whether they are lawfully able to work in the particular with the particular employer or not, and to be able to do those effectively on-the-spot checks. That rollout of the infrastructure, the biometric kits, is starting this year, but we do think that is an important part. It's having the digital infrastructure alongside having the ability to check it to make sure that you can get the proper effective enforcement in place.
I think the white paper and your answer there, obviously there is huge potential for digital ID in terms of new arrivals and securing our borders and having an immigration system that's fit for purpose. Just in terms of the wider population and other issues, so for example online fraud and online crime is one of the huge challenges for your department and for crime prevention and the criminal justice system. Do you see digital ID having a role to play in that? And yeah, more generally across the population, or do you see it confined to simply an issue of immigration and border control within the auspices of the Home Office, of course, because there are other benefits in other departments?
So I think our clear focus is around being able to ensure that we've got proper rules being respected and enforced in the immigration system and in the asylum system as well, that we can make sure that if that there is evidence if people are not here lawfully or they are not working lawfully, we can get that information. We can actually make sure we can take the much stronger action to prevent that kind of abuse of the system taking place. There are then wider considerations for DCIT on making sure that you've also got secure standards, secure underpinning for people to be able to use digital ID, whether it be online and so on as well. So there's wider considerations there.
Just follow up on that. In terms of that DCIT one login, using digital ID in terms of helping customers and helping businesses interact, there is a role for the Home Office and crime prevention in ensuring that online activity is safe, whether that is in regards to child abuse that happens online increasingly and online fraud. Is there conversations going on between the Home Office and DCIT as to working together on this, or is it working in silos at the moment?
We do work with DCIT
Right.
on all of the issues around the online crime and online abuse and online exploitation. So there is a lot of cross-government working. And I think part of the issue here is making sure that you can develop systems that can evolve over time to be used in the most effective way. When you talk about the sort of silo systems, we have over a very long period of time had different silos of different technology operating in different ways, and how you overcome that and how you get systems that are designed to be able to work effectively across not just given different government departments, different agencies as well. Is part of the challenge, making sure that you've got systems that are deliverable rather than things that just don't work in practice.
And is it, final question on this, are you confident that is happening across all departments? So it's not just DCIT, we've got in the NHS are increasingly using patient passports, in the education department we have unique identifiers for children, which has just been in legislation. Do you feel confident that cross-departmental working in this digital space is happening better than it did before when you were in government, for example?
So, I think the digital technology has moved on a very long way since then. So we are using, some of the issues, again, look, this is from an immigration perspective, but I know, for example, we're looking at ways in which you can use the technology that we have around whether people are in the country or not in the country, depending on both not just the visas they have, but also the check-ins and outs through the border, and that border, using the sort of modern technology at the border as well, can also then be integrated with issues of fraud around other government departments as well, whether that be around DWP or whether that be around HMIC or other agencies as well, to make sure that they are able to take action if you have somebody who has been claiming something here and actually is living somewhere else and is not eligible.
Margaret Millane.
Oh yes, thank you. Home Secretary, one of the government's priorities, and quite rightly so, was to halve violence against women and girls. In the short term, would you see that the kind of reporting in the levels that is actually happening, that's a sign of things not going so well, or do you see it a different way?
I think there's two issues. There's the actual prevalence of violence against women and girls, and then there is the reporting of it, and that's one of the reasons why we actually want more victims of crime to be confident to report their case to the police, to be able to get the support that they need. And we know that particularly sexual assaults and sexual crimes have been underreported for a long time. We know that domestic abuse is badly underreported as well. So we actually need to increase reporting as part of strengthening the response to violence against women and girls. We're drawing up a new measurement, or the ONS is building a new way to measure violence against women and girls by looking at what effectively will become a composite measure to combine the figures on domestic abuse, on sexual offences and on stalking, and to be able to measure, therefore, the prevalence of the number of people in the last 12 months who have experienced one of those crimes or been victims of those crimes. That will continue to be separate from the police reporting of the of those crimes, or the police records of the number of those crimes that are reported to the police. There is, of course, still even in survey data, there is still an issue, because actually people may still not, even in response to a survey, be identifying coercive control or be identifying domestic abuse, and that therefore building confidence in people to talk about it and to report, even in response to a survey, may also affect the responses to the survey. But I think the most important important thing is if we've got those new measures in place and we have the new Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which we plan to take forward this summer, then we've got the combination of the ways to better measure it and also the framework to be able to take much stronger action too.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to immigration and the white paper, and Chris Murray.
Thank you, Chair. And can I draw the committee's attention to my register of interests and the support my office receives from RAMP. Home Secretary, I want to ask you about the immigration white paper that you published a fortnight ago, which is one of the biggest changes in British migration policy for a long time. You have said you're committed to lowering net migration, but on violence against women and girls, you've set a target. On knife crime, you've set a target, but on migration, you haven't. I want to ask you why that is. And the Migration Advisory Committee have said that their view is that it's not just the aggregate number of migrants in the country, it's the different types of migration you get. Do you agree with the MAC on that?
So I think, look, the starting point is we've got a history in this area where I think confidence has understandably plummeted. There have been a lot of promises made to people across the country about what would happen to net migration under the previous Conservative government, a lot of promises that were made about what the impact of the new Brexit agreements would be, about what the impact of government policies would be on net migration. And actually the opposite happened. So we saw net migration quadruple in the space of just 4 years, in a period in which the government had made a formal commitment to bring net migration down. I think, therefore, we're not going to take that approach. We're not going to do things that just undermine confidence further. We're going to instead just take practical steps, step by step, as we set out in the white paper. We have identified the impact of some, not all, of the measures in the white paper. So the measures around the English language higher standards, the higher standards for the skilled visa, the higher skills thresholds, the removal of the care worker visa from abroad, a series of those measures, and the combined impact of those is to further reduce the visas issues by expected around 100,000. So we will set out those sorts of measures, and of course the net migration statistics will continue to be published so people will identify and be able to see the progress. But I think the confidence issue is an important one in terms of not setting specific targets that end up undermining that process. I do agree, though, that there are also different kinds of migration and that we need to look at those very differently. So, of course, international students coming here to study, to learn, to bring new investment into not just our higher education institutions, but into our economy and into communities is really important. And we will always want to benefit from the highest levels of global talent. But the scale of increase that we had in the social care visa, for example, meant we had huge exploitation as a result. And it meant that too often employers were ending up driving a big increase in overseas recruitment rather than dealing with issues around skills or pay and conditions here in the UK. And that's really damaging actually for the economy as well as for the immigration system and for confidence in the immigration system. So it's right that we have a different approach for different kinds of migration, for different skills levels, for the different impact and so on they have, but also why we do this within a broader framework which says the objectives of the Immigration White Paper are to bring net migration down, to restore order and control to a system that had become really chaotic, and also to make sure we can better link the immigration system with the skills and with the economy, the domestic expansion of the domestic skills and the domestic workforce that we need.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Home Secretary. I mean, I just want to pry a little bit on that confidence issue, because if you're saying that the reason you don't want to set a target on immigration is because of public confidence, that sort of implies that you know what the target is, but you just don't want to be clear with the public about it, because if you miss it, that may damage confidence. So is that true? Have I got that right? And if so, doesn't that also read across to your other targets? So if you miss the target on violence against women and girls, for example, won't that damage confidence in that system too?
Well, I think there's a particular issue about confidence in the immigration system, and really frankly quite understandably, because the way in which those numbers shot up in such a short period of time. I mean, I've described this as I think this really was a sort of free market experiment in which effectively employers were encouraged to recruit from abroad, including being given a 20% discount on the wages that they were able to pay for people who they recruited from abroad below the going rate, which makes no sense at all, because that applied to shortage occupations, where it may well have been that in those shortage occupations, part of the answer to preventing them being shortage occupations would be to actually pay people properly and to increase pay rather than to have a 20% discount. At the same time, as there were no requirements to train here in the UK. So I think there's a particular challenge around the lack of confidence in the immigration system, which I think is different from the approach to violence against women and girls, where we're trying to drive the whole system and different organisations and agencies to feel part of that mission as well. And then I also think it also reflects back to the other point that you made. So we want international students to continue, but we don't think, and we agree with the previous government belatedly at the very end of their period, that we don't think that short-term master's students should be bringing dependents. We think that we need to have global talent, and we need to make sure that we've got the right approach for those high potential individuals, but we should not have the care work being recruited from abroad. So we are differentiating. There's an overall approach, which is net migration needs to come down, but it's also about restoring control and recognising the different kinds of controls we would have in the system for different kinds of migration.
Great, thank you. And so you started touching there on the economic impact of migration, and it's obviously clear that the government's number one mission is economic growth. But I think this is the first white paper the government has published that doesn't, address economic growth particularly. So I wanted to ask, why was that, and what's your view on the economic impact of migration? And just returning to that point about different types of migrants having different impacts, do you think it's too crude to see all migrants the same when you analyse their impact on the economy? Because I know the OBR does that, and I wonder what your view of that is.
So I think one of the things that we highlight as part of the immigration white paper is the importance of increasing domestic skills, and what that does is that actually also improves our productivity. In the period in which we saw net migration quadruple, and the biggest driver was increase in overseas recruitment and an increase in work visas during that period, we also saw reductions in the level of investment in skills in the UK, the reductions in the level of training in the UK, and we also saw a big increase in the number of working age people who were inactive and who were not in the labour force at all. And those things are related, and that's why it's really important that we have a broader approach to the labour market that looks at all of the different aspects, instead of just thinking, well, there's a labour market problem, what's the answer? Oh, well, let's increase migration. Actually, that is counterproductive for our economic growth, that is counterproductive for our long-term economic sustainability, and counterproductive for productivity. I think we are talking about shifting from what had been, over the last 5 years, high immigration, low skills approach to the economy, to bringing down immigration and making sure we boost skills. So immigration will always be an important part of the UK for generations. People have come to the UK to work in our NHS or to start up businesses or to be part of our universities. That has always been important and will continue to be so. But it has to be controlled and managed. The immigration system has to be controlled and managed. Otherwise, it's not fair, it's not effective, and it's not sustainable. And that's why the whole approach is about that restoring control and order to the system. And by doing so, I think that helps support growth rather than always being seen as this sort of polarised approach that somehow runs contrary to growth.
Thank you. And then my final question is exactly on that question on skills and immigration. The concern would be that as you reduce the people coming into the country, there's a skills gap that isn't met by the domestic workforce fast enough. And we see that in a lot of sectors, but some of them are really critical to the government achieving its objectives. I'm thinking particularly of house building. How confident are you you're working with other departments and other key sector stakeholders to manage any skills gaps that would be an externality of your policy?
Construction's a really good example. So construction will continue to be on the temporary shortage list, so the new temporary shortage list, but the difference between the temporary shortage list and the previous lists that the government's had with discounts and so on is with the temporary shortage list, the whole approach should be, first of all, that this should be a temporary arrangement, that secondly, this needs to be combined with having a workforce strategy in place. So we already have the important components now with the work that Bridget Phillipson has announced to train up 60,000 construction workers over the next few years. So these two things go hand in hand, and it's a very good example of, yes, there should be provision under the temporary shortage list to recruit from overseas, but it has to be alongside that training and that domestic workforce strategy. So the new approach we want is the Labour Market Evidence Group, which should bring together the different skills bodies, including not just Skills England, but the different devolved skilled organisations and governments as well, alongside DWP, because that is about labour market access, alongside the Industrial Strategy Council, because that's also about the role of employers and some of the issues around terms and conditions and the way in which that impacts as well, and the Migration Advisory Committee. And for these different labour market bodies, they've all only looked at one aspect of labour market policy in the past. There's been no overview that says, do you know what, we've got a huge shortage of construction workers, so what are we going to do? How are we bringing all of this partnership together? And to properly bring that together with the Labour Market Evidence Group, for them to then identify what are the key priority areas that we need workforce strategies drawn up, and then from the MAC, from the point of view of the immigration system, to say, okay, are these workforce strategies being met? Are they drawn up? Are they adequate? And what does this mean in terms of whether an occupation should go on the temporary shortage list and how long for? So that allows then for occupations on the temporary shortage list to be capped or to be time limited and to have those additional controls and safeguards in place.
Great, thank you.
And on that topic, Sean Davis.
Yeah, Home Secretary, given that it takes many years to train skilled workers, isn't there a danger, and talks to the trust point that you made quite rightly, I think, in your earlier answer to my colleague, that actually the temporary shortage list just becomes a loophole, that the system decides that temporary means semi-permanent for years ahead, and what mechanisms and oversight will you and the department, the wider government, make sure that that is not the case, that in years and years and years from now, something that was temporary still isn't classed as temporary?
Yes, so we've already, as part of the immigration white paper, identified a series of occupations that will be taken off what used to be the immigration salary list, which we're abolishing and replacing with the temporary shortage list. The number of occupations on the temporary shortage list will be significantly lower than the number of occupations currently on the immigration salary list. I was flicking through to see if I had that number in front of me, and I don't, unless
I haven't got the number in front of me.
We can, someone can remember, we may find it in our notes and be able to tell you the expected reduction in the number of occupations that are on the list. So we'll be reducing those number of occupations, but then it has to be linked to the workforce strategies for the future. And part of the thing that the Migration Advisory Committee will do when they're assessing what jobs should go on to the temporary shortage list will be to do an assessment of, is the workforce strategy working, is it being pursued?
There isn't a solid definition of temporary in time, measured in time.
So that will vary from occupation to occupation. So clearly, if you have something where the training period takes a long time, that will be different from something where, yeah, there may be some additional needs for training, but to be honest, you could do the training in 2 months. And so there will be a difference in, therefore, the approach taken to different occupations.
And we've got millions of job vacancies currently. We've got millions of people unemployed or economically inactive. What happens if you just simply, and British business say to you as the Home Secretary, we just simply cannot get the workforce from Britain, and there is a temporary arrangement that's coming to an end, and we simply can't do it. Will that then be moved from the temporary shortage list to more of a permanent solution? Will the system be that agile?
So the approach is that the skills threshold is being raised. So the skilled worker visa would apply to graduate level jobs.
Understand.
For below graduate level jobs, they will only be able to go on the temporary shortage list if they are effectively the critical areas, for example, those that are critical to the industrial strategy or something like construction. But there will be some areas where actually there probably are shortages at the moment that industry themselves need to address and can do so relatively swiftly, that they will not be put onto the temporary shortage list. And the employers and that sector needs to respond and adjust, because we're actually trying to get the economy to behave in a different way here, and to make sure that we've got the level of investment in skills and training that we need, but also put proper value on certain jobs that it just may be about the shift patterns that are a total nightmare. Well, no wonder you can't recruit people to be able to do those jobs, because the kind of shift pattern makes it totally impossible to drop the kids off at school, or makes it totally impossible to live your life, or is not understanding the need for employers to be able to respond. So there will be some jobs and some occupations where those will always be constraints and will always be difficult, but there are others where we want employers to be able to adapt. And I think the thing that's been interesting in the reception of the white paper is actually how much there's been a sense of employers also want a high skill economy. Employers also want to know that they are not being undercut by other employers who are just actually ending up breaking the rules or ending up not doing their bit as well. So I think across the economy, I think there is a strong commitment to us being a high-skilled economy, making sure we get the highest skills and talent from all over the world that we need, but also making sure that we're bringing net migration down and we're focusing on the training here in the UK. Simon has kindly checked out the number and says it's up to 180 jobs and occupations that have been removed from the immigration salary list that won't go on to the temporary shortage list.
Thank you, so just two very quick questions. One detailed, another kind of more principle. So, I declare my interest as chair of the APPG for the event sector. Does a 28-day visa to allow workers and visitors into the country for business fit into your definition of controlled and managed migration?
So the net migration figures are for people coming to the UK for more than 12 months. So there are obviously already a series of different temporary visas and arrangements for businesses, for example, who want to people want to come for business meetings, for example, in the UK as part of international trade. It's really important that you can continue to have those sorts of meetings that you've got where you've got trade arrangements and so on, contracts that cut across borders and so on. So there's always been those kinds of arrangements, and those kinds of arrangements.
Well, some particular concerns, I'll take that offline. And then the more broader question, which is, I expect what your answer will be, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think that we should look at how other countries organise the difference between illegal migration, which sits with the equivalent of the Home Office, and legal migration, which normally or can sit with the business department to see as an economic growth? Do you see that there are arguments in favour of that, particularly given that in the public opinion, often the two things are mixed together?
You're right, people can often link the different things, but actually I think people also have different attitudes to different aspects of legal and illegal migration. I think the strongest concerns that people have is about illegal migration. The strongest concerns people have are about dangerous small boat crossings that undermine border security and put lives at risk. I think, though, I think trying to sort of carve up different systems, you just spend a huge amount of time doing so. In the end, there has to be order and control across the board. And making sure that there is order and control in the legal migration system is also about how you make sure that the rules are enforced. And that means identifying where there is illegal migration as well. And I'll give you one example of where I think these are linked, where we are taking now stronger action, is we have had increasing evidence of visa misuse and of people who are claiming asylum at the end of their visa, even though nothing has changed in their home country in that period, or different kinds of visas suddenly being used for a surge of asylum claims, even for countries that is not justified for. So we've already taken steps to tighten restrictions to reverse the loosening of rules that had taken place under the previous government for countries like Jordan and Colombia, where we had seen a big increase in asylum claims as a result of some of the loosening of visa controls. We've also taken some action around some of the visa measures around Trinidad and Tobago as well, just about making sure that we can restore order to the system. There are some other areas we are looking at, including areas where people are claiming asylum at the end of their student visa, again, even though nothing significant has changed in their home country during that period as well. So that's why I think there are benefits from having all of these systems interrelated.
Thank you.
Robbie Moore, and I'm conscious we've just over a quarter of an hour, so if I can urge brevity, please.
Yep. Okay, fine, Chair. And one of those areas which has drawn particular attention is the role of care workers. And I just want to build on the point that from the announcements to do with the changes of overseas recruitment, the Home Office are expecting the impact to be about 7,000 on approximate numbers with care workers. I was just wondering how many care workers have previously been displaced, have been successfully rematched, as you're aware, with new care roles.
So I don't have those figures in front of me. I don't know if we have them.
The
We might
precise
have
number
to
in front of
write
me.
to you
Okay.
with that. What we've obviously had set up is a system where those who came to the UK on a care worker visa, and then it turned out actually the sponsorship of that care worker had to be revoked because actually they weren't meeting the proper standards, they didn't have proper checks in place, sometimes the job just did not exist, were then set up as a pool system so that they could be recruited by other employers rather than other employers continue to recruit from overseas. So that system does exist, and I will write to the committee with any figures that we have on those.
Thank you, and we would appreciate that. And just finally, just on this section, was what advice or what is the government looking at doing if care providers can't fill these essential roles?
So care workers for a transition period, the employers will continue to be able to recruit international care workers who are here already on an alternative legal route. So those who are already here legally, who have permission to work, will be able to then get care worker jobs and to transition onto a care worker visa. So we will continue to do that as a transition period, but there's part of that we then also have to implement a fair pay agreement to be able to ensure that there is a proper strategy for supporting care workers in the UK and for making sure that we can have domestic recruitment and value people who are doing really one of the toughest jobs that there is in the country.
And as part of the decision to try and bring out a strategy that's reducing the inward migration of about 7,000 for care workers, has there been any impact assessment, fiscal impact assessment on the cost of care on those care providers that they find gaps of not being able to keep that level of recruitment going with the new announcements that have been made?
So we think that the care industry will be able to recruit from the those who are here lawfully, whether that be UK residents or be international people who are here from overseas who are already here lawfully. So we think they will be able to do that and to meet their recruitment pressures that they face. But we are working with the Health Department on this. As we introduce different changes through the immigration rules and through legislation and so on, as the different parts of the immigration white paper, we will then also produce further impact assessments and so on. But we've obviously set out as part of the annex to the white paper some of these provisions.
Okay, fine, thank you.
I want to spend the last 15 minutes on illegal migration and the asylum system, but very quick point around the Ukrainian scheme. Concerns have been raised about what will happen come the autumn when the 18-month extension will start to be just 12 months, and the risks there will be for children getting into schools, taking up jobs, etc. I wonder if you could look before the summer recess at whether there can be some certainty given to Ukrainian refugees who are here on that visa system.
Yes, we are continuing to do that. I think it's very important that particularly that academic timetable for young people is taken into account. So I am very conscious of that and ensuring that we recognise that as part of the continuing support for the Ukraine scheme.
Thank you. So if we can move on to illegal migration, and Chris Murray is going to lead off on that, and then Paul Kohler is going to come in on the asylum system.
Thank you. Home Secretary, 10 years ago we didn't have small boat crossings, but now they're one of the biggest challenges your department faces. What's changed in the interim is we don't have the Dublin system. There's no mechanism for the Home Office to send back people to European countries where they should be. So my question is, are you looking at ways to work with European countries to strengthen that? And can you tell us how many gangs you've smashed so far?
So there's a series of factors, I think, behind what's happened. We've seen this big increase in small boat crossings over the last. You go back to 2018, and it was barely a handful. And since then, an entire criminal industry has taken hold along our borders with networks, including supply chains that spread right across the...
I want to be really specific about international cooperation on this issue, sorry. We don't have much time, so forgive me.
So in terms of strengthening the international cooperation, we obviously always said that we would like to see a replacement for the Dublin scheme and to recognise the impact of that. And it is something that there is evidence of people who arrive in the UK raising that as being a factor for them. But look, nobody should be making these dangerous boat crossings. They do undermine border security, they put lives at risk, and it was completely unacceptable, the numbers that we saw on Saturday, but also the continuing nature of the problem. The central focus of the cooperation that we are building at the moment, particularly with France, is their agreement to change the law about intervention in French waters, or to change their rules about interventions in French waters. They have a maritime review underway at the moment. We are very keen for them to implement that law change as rapidly as possible. And also, I was in Berlin last week, meeting with the German Interior Minister to talk about the stronger enforcement we need and their agreement to change the law in Germany so that we can go after the warehouses that are in Germany.
Would you see a return to Dublin as an option for the Home Office? Is it something you're pursuing, given when we had it before we didn't have small boat crossings?
So we have always said that we would like to see those sorts of arrangements and the replacement for that kind of arrangement. We obviously need to make sure that we've got a system in place that is workable. You also referred to the impact in terms of the gangs. We do. There is information that will be released later this afternoon about an additional set of arrests that have taken place in the UK, led by immigration enforcement, into a criminal gang network that has been running both illegal entry and also illegal working and facilitating illegal working, and we can send you those further details because we have substantially expanded the work that the National Crime Agency is doing, the work that the Border Security Command is doing, and the work both here in the UK. This particular example today is about a gang that has been operating based from here in the UK, but we also know there are particularly Iraqi Kurdish gangs and other gangs that have been operating in northern France that we're cooperating both with France and with Germany and with Iraq and the Kurdish regional government to be able to pursue those gang networks as well.
When I asked that question, I did not expect you to say you'd smashed a gang today. So that's very interesting to hear. One final question from me, which is a lot of the people who come over in small boats end up in these asylum hotels, which are so controversial. They have cost the Home Office £7 billion over this contract. They are creating huge issues in local communities, and it's actually quite difficult for some asylum seekers themselves. Moreover, it is overseas development assistance. This is money the UK says we want to send to the poorest people in the world. We had the providers in, and they told us that they have only been penalised 3% of the time, and they've only paid £4 million out of their £400 million in profits. Now, you have a break clause coming up in these contracts next year. Please tell me you're at least considering breaking those contracts, or at least substantially revising them.
Well, we've inherited these contracts.
I recognise it was all inherited.
I am concerned about the level of money that's gone into these contracts. Also, look, the scale of the backlog that we inherited. We need to end asylum hotels altogether. Some of that is about bringing the whole backlog down, being able to clear the decision making. We have.
To interrupt, we're going to come into some questions
So
on the
sorry,
asylum
I'll come back to
backlog.
that.
No, it's
Yep.
absolutely fine. I'm just conscious of
So
time.
in terms of the management of the contracts, well, we've introduced tighter conditions of the contract. I think you have Minister Angela Eagle giving you more evidence on that, who can talk through some of the details of that. You'll know that we have been taking action to remove one of the suppliers, Stay Belvedere, from the supply chain as part of the tighter contract management. We'll keep all contracts under review, but I think the core issue we have to do here is bring the overall numbers down in the asylum accommodation system.
Sean Davis.
Points just on the provider question. We had the National Audit Office brief us in the report. We've also had the providers themselves who said they've put tens of millions of pounds aside to pay back to the Home Office through excess profits. Why on earth hasn't the Home Office taken that money back and used that money for the priorities of the British people?
So we have already taken a series of steps since the election to drive better value through the contracting process. We're saving hundreds of millions of pounds already since the election, both compared to previous years and also compared to the plans that we have inherited as a result of those changes, and are also looking at further changes in order to be able to drive those costs down and to be able to get better value.
I absolutely appreciate that, Home Secretary, but we had providers in front of us who said that they've literally put tens of millions of pounds aside and they haven't paid it over to the Home Office because the Home Office haven't asked yet.
Yeah, so this is the profit share mechanism. We can go into the detail next Tuesday with Dame Angela Eagle. But essentially, we're doing the audit of the money at the moment. And once we've been through the audit, we will request the money that is due.
And one final question. This is clearly a huge issue for the electorate, for constituencies. Is it not time now for a radical solution around the application of the European Convention of Human Rights, and whether or not we really need to look differently at the interpretation of that convention, or completely disapplying ourselves from it in part, either on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis?
So, interesting, compliance with international law has already helped us get new agreements in place with France and with Germany to help tackle some of the serious problems with the criminal gangs operations that we face. So the agreements with France, as you may know, the previous government tried over about a 6-year period to get the French government to agree to intervene in French waters, and at each stage they would not do so. They have agreed to do that now, but part of the way in which we have been able to build up that much stronger cooperation is also by saying we recognise we will continue to comply with international law. Similarly with Germany, with their ability and commitment to changing the law. So, however, we also need to look at the way in which laws are being interpreted. So, as we put in the immigration white paper, there are areas, for example, where the system around family migration has become so complex. The proportion of decisions being taken as exceptional, often under interpretations around the ECHR, around particularly Article 8, end up being about 30% the cases. Well, that's not exceptional. That is a much broader proportion. But that reflects some of the complexity of the system and the overall system and the way in which the decisions have been based on a series of court decisions as opposed to having a clear framework set out by Parliament that then can be much easier for the courts to interpret and much more reflect what I think the public would want to see. So we are looking at that
we are
as part
have
of
to
it.
Move
Sorry,
on. It's all right.
Chair.
I realise we've got 5 minutes and Paul Kohler has got questions on the asylum system.
At last. As you mentioned it, Home Secretary, I refer the committee to my register of interests. One of my donors, Safwan Adam, had an interest in Stay Belvedere. There are something like 250,000 asylum seekers in the system at the moment. I know you inherited this backlog, but when are you expecting to clear it?
So we've already had a significant drop in the number of people waiting an initial decision. So the decisions we've speeded up decisions very substantially since the election, including speeding up the initial decisions, including also taking action as part of the Border and Security and Asylum Bill to introduce statutory timetables for appeals. Because whilst we can make substantial progress on the initial decisions, and we are doing so on those and expect that to continue to come down over the coming months as well.
What's the target on that? What are you looking at with regard to the initial decision? When should that be made? By what time?
So I was just scrolling through my pages that maybe that excellent. The number with initial decisions are more than double those in the 3 months before the election in the period of January to March. We're going to continue with that high level of decision making, and that should bring the initial decision making down. There's obviously a certain point at which the process, it just becomes the number of people, the time it takes then for process decisions to go through the system.
Though? What's that target to make an initial decision? So, what's the time target? Duration?
So we are expect over the course of this year and certainly over the course of the next 6 months to lead to a very substantial drop in the level of initial decision making or the backlog on initial decision making. But if we don't have this legislation go through on the appeal system, then we will still end up with long, unacceptable delays in the system. So we're introducing the statutory timetable for making appeals decisions so that we can also speed things through, both for initial decisions and then to have the appeals decisions also speeded up as well.
I'll answer my question though about a target for the initial decision. Do you not have a target for the initial decision?
So at the moment we are still working through a backlog of cases that have been in the system for a considerable amount of time. And as the Home Secretary was saying, there'll always be a level of what we call unworkable cases in that system, people who are up for trial or something. So until we have got through that backlog, which will be of longer cases, and we've still got about a third of cases that have been in the system for longer than a year, which goes back to the delays last year through the IMA. We need to work through all of that in order to then establish the rhythm and whether or not we're going to put some sort of target service level agreement around initial decisions.
The backlog's down to 79,000 in the most recent figures. Actually, it's continued to fall since then. Those are the most recent published figures, and that in itself was a 13% drop on the previous quarter. So that's the pace at which we're making decisions at the moment. We will continue to make initial decisions at that current pace, but we also need to make sure that we speed up the appeals as well.
I understand all of that. Why are you resistant to actually declare that you have a target for the initial decision to be made? Or why is that so difficult? You're going for a target for appeals. period. So why are you reluctant to
You
give
mean
me
a timetable?
target?
Target?
How long should it take
Yeah.
for the decision to be made?
Look, well, so part of the reason for that is because the new system, we are going to set out further reforms to the asylum system, but one of the things that I have always been keen to do is to have a system for fast-track decisions and appeals, so that for people, if people arrive from predominantly safe countries, actually they shouldn't be sitting in the asylum system for a long time at all. We should be able to take those decisions really fast, be able to take those decisions, make sure that they go through the appeal system really fast, and then also make sure that they are returned really quickly as well. So that would mean a fast-track system alongside the main asylum system. I think that would be really important in terms of making sure that the system is fair. That will require legislation in order to be able to do that, as well as new system design. So part of the reason, I do understand the question that you're asking, but part of the reason is because I actually think there should be faster tracks for those cases so that we can get those through the system really quickly, really within a matter of months.
And when are we talking about this legislation? I understand the reason why we need such fast tracks. What are we talking about?
So the first phase of legislation that we've introduced in this area is the Border Security Act. That obviously brings in the counter-terrorism powers in terms of tackling the small boats and the criminal gangs. Does also include some measures around this, including the statutory timetable on appeals. We do want to bring forward further legislation. We will announce further measures on this as soon as we are able to, and I will update the committee as soon as I can.
I'm very conscious that we have just overrun the time we had. I realise that because we had an hour of voting, we lost quite a lot of the time, and we have many questions we'd like to put to you, Home Secretary. So I hope we can invite you back again soon. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the committee for your questions. Order.
Thank you.